There is a house at the end of a quiet street in Quahog, Rhode Island. You have seen it 1,000 times. You know the green front door, the yellow kitchen, the familiar couch where a man with no neck and a cleft chin has spent the better part of 25 years failing upward through life. You have laughed at the jokes, you have sat through the cutaways, you have watched that family stumble through catastrophe after catastrophe and emerge every single time entirely unchanged. And somewhere along the way, between all the noise and the chaos and the relentless comedy, something slipped past you. A lot of things slipped past you. This video is not about the jokes. This video is about the questions. The ones that were planted quietly inside the episodes and left there, never followed up on, never explained, never resolved. Some of them were deliberate. Some became canon by accident. Some are so deeply embedded in the show's own official record that the only way to miss them is to be laughing too hard to notice. Tonight, we are not laughing. Tonight, we are just going to sit with the mysteries of Family Guy one by one and let them settle over you the way the best questions always do. Slowly, quietly. Without demanding answers, you will never be given. You do not need to stay awake for this. The mysteries will still be here when you drift off. They have been waiting this long already. They can wait a little longer. Let us begin at the top, not with Peter, and not with Lois, and not with the talking dog who somehow has a library card and a failed novel manuscript. Let us begin with the man who owns everything. Let us begin with Carter Pewterschmidt. Carter Pewterschmidt is described in the show's official record as a billionaire industrialist, the patriarch of one of New England's oldest and most powerful families, and a man who has held open contempt for his son-in-law since the moment Peter Griffin walked through his front door. The show presents Carter primarily as a comedic antagonist, a caricature of old money cruelty who torments Peter for sport. But if you slow down and look at what the show has actually confirmed about this man across more than 2 decades of episodes, the picture that assembles itself is considerably more unsettling than a cartoon villain. What assembles itself is a portrait of systemic, multi-generational, entirely consequence-free power. Start with the money. In the episode titled Grumpy Old Man, Pewterschmidt Industries is described on screen as a $6 billion empire. That number is canon. But more interesting than the number is the nature of the empire itself. Pewterschmidt Industries is not a company. It is a portfolio of companies. Its divisions span United States Steel, pharmaceuticals, shipping, telecommunications, aerospace, and biotechnology. Think about what that means in practical terms. You're not looking at a rich man who inherited a family business. You're looking at a private individual with operational control over the physical and chemical infrastructure of American industry. Steel means bridges, railroads, and building frames. Pharmaceuticals mean medicine, research, and treatment pipelines. Telecommunications means information flow. Aerospace means, among other things, government contracts. The diversification of Pewterschmidt Industries is not about profit margins. It is about owning the systems themselves. Carter's middle name is Roosevelt. That detail is part of the show's official record. Now, in a series that fills its dialogue with throwaway names and random references, you could reasonably argue that a presidential surname as a middle name is just a bit. Except Family Guy does not give its characters presidential surnames as middle names without thematic intent. The Roosevelt name positions Carter not just as a wealthy man, but as a man with documented genealogical ties to American political aristocracy. The show never explicitly confirms a blood relation to the Roosevelt family, but it does not have to. The placement of the name is enough. Within the logic of this show, within the careful architecture of what the writers have chosen to confirm about this character over 20+ years, Carter Roosevelt Pewterschmidt is a man whose family and the family of American presidential power exist in the same social and genetic orbit. Now consider what Carter has been confirmed to actually do with his power. In the episode Tea Peter, Carter engineers the collapse of Quahog's municipal government. He does not bribe officials, he does not buy votes, he manufactures a grassroots political movement, an astroturfed populist rebellion specifically designed to generate public pressure for shutting down Quahog's government entirely. His goal is not ideological. The show is explicit about this. His goal is to eliminate the pollution regulations that prevent Pewterschmidt Industries from dumping chemical waste into Quahog's water supply without oversight. Mayor Adam West's government collapses within 5 days. Basic services vanish. The town becomes, as the episode depicts it, ungovernable. Garbage accumulates, infrastructure fails, the community deteriorates into chaos, and at the end of all of it, Carter gets exactly what he wanted. The regulations disappear, the waste dumping resumes, and Carter faces no legal consequences for what is, by any reasonable definition, a private citizen orchestrating the deliberate collapse of a democratically elected government. That last part bears repeating because the episode moves past it quickly and it is easy to let it slide. A private citizen engineered the destruction of a local government through manufactured political theatre and received no consequences of any kind. Not a fine, not an investigation, not a single official inquiry. Mayor West folded, the town recovered eventually, and Carter returned to his estate and his poker games and his casual cruelty toward Peter as though nothing had happened. Because for him, nothing had happened. He won as he always wins, and the system that was supposed to hold him accountable simply did not engage. Then there is the cancer cure. This is perhaps the most quietly damning confirmed fact in the entire show's 25-year canon. In the episode The Old Man and the Big C, Brian Griffin overhears at a hospital that Carter has terminal cancer. He tells the family. They rush to the Pewterschmidt estate and find Carter in perfect health. Brian, suspicious, investigates, and the truth he and Stewie uncover is this: Carter Pewterschmidt has possessed a functioning cure for cancer since 1999. He has been deliberately withholding it from the public because, in his own words, treating cancer is more profitable than curing it. The pharmaceutical division of Pewterschmidt Industries generates its revenue from treatment, from the ongoing management of illness rather than its resolution. A cure ends the revenue stream, so the cure stays locked away. Lois confronts her father. Carter promises to release it. He does not release it. He holds a press conference and announces a new deodorant. That is the resolution of the episode. Carter lied to his daughter about withholding medicine that could save millions of lives, and then he went back to his poker games, and the show moved on to the next episode. In the same episode, it is confirmed that Pewterschmidt Industries' chemical waste dumping gave an entire town cancer. Carter is not merely profiting from illness, he is creating illness through his industrial operations and then monopolizing the treatment of that illness through his pharmaceutical division. He is the source and the solution simultaneously, and the solution is the one thing he will never allow to reach the people who need it. And yet no investigation followed, no federal agency appeared, no journalists arrived at the estate. The show simply confirmed this fact and moved on, because within the world of Family Guy, this is not remarkable. This is just how Carter operates. Now consider the Griffin house. In the episode Throw It Away, it is confirmed that Carter and Barbara Pewterschmidt pay for the Griffin family home. Peter Griffin does not own 31 Spooner Street. He never has. His father-in-law, the man who openly despises him, the man who once offered him $1 million not to marry Lois, the man who has treated Peter as property for the entire run of the show, that man holds the financial strings on the house where Peter's children are being raised. Carter hates Peter. He has made this hatred a matter of public record across 2 decades of episodes. He offered Peter $1 million to disappear in the episode Death Lives. Peter married Lois anyway, and Carter's response was not to cut them off. His response was to invest. He made sure his grandchildren would be raised inside a Pewterschmidt-owned property, under a Pewterschmidt financial umbrella, dependent on Pewterschmidt goodwill, whether Peter knew it or not. The slavery connection is perhaps the detail most people remember from the episode Peter Griffin, Husband, Father, Brother, which aired during the show's third season. In that episode, Peter discovers through genealogical research at the Quahog Public Library that the Griffin family has a black ancestor named Nate Griffin. Further research conducted through Carter's own family history book confirms that Nate Griffin was enslaved by the Pewterschmidt family. Carter's ancestor owned Peter's ancestor. The Griffin bloodline was, for a specific and documented period of American history, legal property of the Pewterschmidt family. The episode establishes this. Peter demands reparations. Carter pays him $20,000 to never mention it again, and the episode ends. But the detail does not end there, not really, because the detail is structural. The power dynamic between Carter and Peter, the one where Carter degrades Peter for sport, and Peter endures it because his family's financial stability depends on Carter's goodwill, is not a cartoon invention. Within the logic of this show's own confirmed canon, it has a documented historical precedent stretching back to the institution of slavery in America. The legal ownership ended. The economic dependency did not. Barbara Pewterschmidt adds another layer. Confirmed in canon, Barbara's maiden name was Hebrewberg. She is a Holocaust survivor who concealed her Jewish identity when she married Carter, specifically to gain access to elite social circles that barred Jewish members. Both characters confirm this detail in the episode where it is revealed, and both confirm it was the right thing to do. That last part, the casual agreement that erasing one's identity for social access was correct and worth it, is the detail the show delivers without blinking and moves past without examining. Because the Pewterschmidts operate in circles where those calculations are not unusual, where access to power has always required the right kind of erasure. There is a property in the Pewterschmidt portfolio called Cherrywood Manor, introduced in the episode Peter Caviar Eater as an estate the family owns and uses as a primary residence. The manor's history, as the show reveals it includes a period when it functioned as a brothel serving historical American political figures. The show names Ulysses S. Grant among those who visited. The show plays this for laughs, but if you sit with the implication for a moment, you are looking at a Pewterschmidt-owned property that, during the Reconstruction era, hosted the private activities of sitting American political figures. The Pewterschmidt family has been adjacent to American power since the founding of the nation. Their Newport estate, which the family's own documented backstory places before the American Revolution, exists alongside a property that served as what could reasonably be described as a leverage factory during one of the most consequential political periods in American history. None of this makes Carter Pewterschmidt a secret shadow government. The show does not claim that, and neither does this video. What the show does claim, through 25 years of confirmed canon detail, is that Carter Pewterschmidt is a man who has been embedded in American power structures for generations, who controls industries that form the literal skeleton of the national economy, who has demonstrated willingness to corrupt law enforcement as casually as ordering a meal, who manufactured the collapse of a local government for profit, who is suppressing a cancer cure while profiting from the illness his own factories created, and who holds the financial strings on the house where his grandchildren are being raised by a man too stupid to understand what those strings mean. Peter Griffin does not get away with things because Family Guy is a cartoon. He gets away with things because his father-in-law owns the county, and possibly the state, and has enough political capital and enough institutional reach to make problems disappear the way old dynasties have always made problems disappear. Not through dramatic intervention, but through the quiet, patient, multi-generational process of ensuring that the systems which would hold you accountable are systems you already own. Carter Roosevelt Pewterschmidt is not a joke, he is a portrait. And every time the record produces another detail about his empire, it adds one more brushstroke to a painting that has been quietly assembling itself for a quarter of a century. Let that settle for a moment. You can close your eyes. The story continues whether you're watching or not. In the third season of Family Guy, there is a courtroom scene. It is not the main plot of the episode. It is a supporting sequence inside an episode primarily about Brian Griffin accidentally impregnating Carter Pewterschmidt's prize-winning greyhound. The episode is called Screwed the Pooch, and it aired on November 29th, 2001. During that courtroom scene, in an attempt to prove that Brian deserves access to his puppies, Peter Griffin begins listing facts about the Griffin children that only a truly attentive parent would know. He starts a sentence. Brian finishes it. Chris's favourite ice cream is chocolate chip. Stewie's favourite bedtime story is Goodnight Moon. And Meg's real father's name is Stan Thompson. Nobody in the courtroom reacts. The judge does not look up. Peter does not flinch. Lois does not object. Meg is present in the scene, but she's wearing headphones. She is listening to music. She does not hear a single word of what just became part of the official canon of Family Guy, and the episode moves on. That is the entirety of what the show has confirmed about Stan Thompson in the context of its main continuity. One name dropped once in a supporting scene of an episode about a dog's legal troubles, heard by everyone except the person it concerns most. No follow-up episode, no Stan Thompson appearance, no explanation of who this man is, how Lois knows him, why Peter raised Meg as his own, or what any of it means for the Griffin family dynamic that the show has been building for more than 2 decades. The writers planted a fact in the show's official record and then simply left it there, a loose thread they chose not to pull, or chose to leave deliberately, depending on how you want to read it. The detail does not disappear after that episode. It surfaces again across later seasons in brief, glancing ways that confirm it was not forgotten. In the episode Forefather, Peter imagines what his life would have looked like if he had left Meg with Stan Thompson rather than raising her himself. It is played as a quick gag. In Not All Dogs, Go to Heaven, Brian mentions that if God were real, Meg would know about her real father. The family immediately shushes him. Nervous Meg might overhear. That small moment is worth pausing on. The rest of the Griffin family knows. Peter knows. Lois knows. Chris and Stewie know. The only person in the Griffin household who does not know that her biological father is a man named Stan Thompson is Meg herself. And the family has made a collective, ongoing, apparently active decision to keep her in the dark. Meg Griffin's birth story, across the full run of Family Guy, is not stable. It is not a single, clean origin that the show tells differently at different points for comic variation. It is a set of deeply contradictory accounts that cannot all be true simultaneously. In the very first season, in the episode I Never Met the Dead Man, Peter is present at Meg's birth and asks the doctor to check again when told the baby is a girl. The implication is that he expected a boy, that this birth disappointed him in some way he could not quite articulate, even in the moment. Later, in Friends Without Benefits, a cutaway reveals that Meg was born with her heart on the outside of her head, positioned on top of her skull, which is why she wears a hat. The hat is covering a heart. The exposed heart is the gag. In A Fistful of Meg, an official document in the episode reveals that Peter changed Meg's birth certificate to read Megatron Griffin, which raises the obvious question of what it originally said and why he felt the need to change it at all. And in Ratings Guy, the confirmed episode plot includes a cutaway where Lois and Peter look back fondly on the time they drove baby Meg to a fire station and attempted to leave her there as an infant. These are not variations on the same story. They are incompatible fragments. A birth where the father expected a boy. A birth where the baby emerged physically different from any other child in the show. A birth certificate that was altered. A family that tried to abandon the infant within her first year of life. And somewhere behind all of it, a man named Stan Thompson, who is never shown, never explained, and whose existence is known to every member of the Griffin household except the daughter whose paternity he represents. Now consider the treatment pattern. Across the full run of Family Guy, Meg Griffin is subjected to a level of sustained cruelty from her own family that exceeds anything the show directs at any other character. Peter once admitted he thought Meg was a house cat for 4 years. Lois has on multiple occasions packed Meg's school lunch with food waste, with peels and crusts, and, in one episode, a taunting photograph of Lois eating a real meal. The family has discussed aborting Meg on multiple occasions in flashback. They attempted to abandon her as an infant. They have tried to sell her. They have, on more than one occasion, in more than one episode, actively encouraged or passively permitted harm to come to her in ways they would not permit with Chris or Stewie. The show codes all of this as comedy. It has been coding it as comedy for 25 years. But there is another way to read this pattern, and it runs directly through the fact of Stan Thompson. Human beings possess biological and psychological mechanisms for detecting genetic relatedness. Research on blended families consistently shows that non-biological parents invest less emotionally in children who are not genetically their own, even when they consciously believe they are fully bonded, even when they love those children, even when they would be genuinely horrified to be told their behaviour reflected anything other than equal parental devotion. The mechanism is unconscious. It operates below the level of awareness. It expresses itself in small behavioural asymmetries that accumulate over time into patterns that are legible from the outside, even when they are invisible from within. The question the show has never addressed is whether what we are watching when we watch Peter and Lois treat Meg the way they do is comedy, or whether it is something the show built into the character from the beginning and simply never named. Brian Griffin is the character who first revealed Stan Thompson's name. He is also the character who, in Not All Dogs Go to Heaven, tells Meg that she resembles Peter, directly contradicting the Stan Thompson revelation he himself introduced. Brian is the most intellectually capable character in the Griffin household. He reads, he is aware of the larger patterns in the world around him. He notices things that the other characters do not, and he has, at least twice in confirmed episodes, navigated the Stan Thompson question in ways that suggest he has thought about it considerably more than one throwaway courtroom moment would require. He revealed the name. He later offered a counter-narrative. He made sure the family silenced the subject before Meg could overhear it. Brian is not an innocent bystander to this particular mystery. He is a character who's been navigating it actively for at least 20 years of show continuity. The show's treatment of Meg's transformation in the episode Don't Make Me Over is one of the details that has attracted the most attention from viewers who follow this particular thread. In that episode, Trisha Takanawa gives Meg a makeover at a mall. Hair, makeup, contacts instead of glasses. The episode presents this as a superficial cosmetic event, but the response is not superficial. Meg, who the show has spent episodes establishing as universally rejected and physically unremarkable, is suddenly and completely transformed. A record producer pursues her. She performs on a nationally televised musical program and is mobbed by the kind of adulation that the episode presents as genuine. And then at the episode's end, Meg steps back from it. She says being beautiful is too much work. The transformation reverts. She returns to her default state. Within the episode's logic, this is played as a joke about vanity, but it raises a question that the joke does not answer. What actually happened in that mall? Bone structure does not change with mascara and a new haircut. Facial proportions do not shift because you take off glasses. The transformation the episode depicts is categorical, not cosmetic. It is the kind of change that requires an underlying physical potential that was simply not visible before. A dormant quality activating rather than a surface quality being enhanced. And the fact that Meg can step back from it, that she can choose to return to her baseline appearance through an act of decision rather than through any physical reversal, suggests that the baseline is itself a choice, a default that requires maintenance, a state she inhabits because it is easier than the alternative. The show never explains this. The episode moves on. Meg returns to being the target, and somewhere in the official record of Family Guy, there is a man named Stan Thompson who fathered a child, left her with Lois Pewterschmidt and her adoptive father, Peter Griffin, and has never been seen or heard from in any canonical episode of the show's main continuity. Meg eventually meets him in the 22nd season, in a storyline that finally acknowledges what the third season planted and left untended for 19 years. He wanted nothing to do with her at first. Over the course of a single car ride, he learned she was more like him than he expected. Whether that resolution satisfies the mystery or simply closes one door while leaving all the others open is a question each viewer will answer differently. But the name came first. The name was always there, dropped in a courtroom scene inside an episode about a dog's legal troubles, heard by everyone in the room except the only person it truly concerned. Stan Thompson. 2 words, 1 scene, 2001, and 20 years of Meg Griffin looking at a family that treats her differently without ever being given a language for why. Whatever keeps you most comfortable, settle into it now. The questions have nowhere to be. They are patient things. There is a recurring structural element in the episodes that deal with Meg's treatment by her family that is worth examining in slow detail. The show does not simply depict Peter and Lois as bad parents in the way that many animated shows depict bad parents, which is to say, through incompetence or distraction, or the kind of casual neglect that reads as realistic and relatable. The show depicts a pattern of specifically targeted harm directed at one child and not the others that is consistent and documentable across the show's full run. When Peter humiliates his children, Meg is the one most frequently chosen as the vehicle for the most degrading versions of that humiliation. When Lois expresses disappointment or frustration with her children, Meg receives it at a pitch and with a directness that neither Chris nor Stewie receives in the same way or with the same frequency. When the family is required to make a sacrifice that involves one of the children bearing an unfair cost, the assignment tends to land on Meg. This pattern is not invisible to the show's own creative record. Later seasons acknowledged it publicly enough that production changes were made. The season 22 rehabilitation, which multiple critics writing about the show noted as a significant tonal shift, was described in various entertainment press contexts as a deliberate course correction in the character's treatment. The creative team observed that Meg's situation had escalated beyond what the show's comedic register could contain without producing something that felt less like dark comedy and more like documentation of sustained harm. They pulled back. They made Lois warmer. They gave Meg moments of dignity that earlier seasons had systematically denied her. But the pattern across the seasons that preceded that correction had been consistent enough and specifically targeted enough that the question of its origin is worth sitting with. Because the show itself, through the Stan Thompson revelation and through the biological rejection pattern it documents without naming, provides the raw material for an explanation that is more interesting than bad parenting as a genre convention. A child raised by people whose deepest biological instincts are quietly signalling a mismatch that neither party can consciously identify or address. A family that loves each other in the messy, imperfect, cartoon logic way that the Griffin family loves each other, but that processes one member of itself through a filter that was installed before anyone in the family was old enough to know it was there. And the one member processed through that filter is the one who heard headphones instead of her own origin story in a Rhode Island courtroom in 2001, and who has been wearing a hat over her heart ever since. On November 24th, 2013. The 6th episode of Family Guy's 12th season aired on Fox. The episode was called Life of Brian. Brian, Griffin and Stewie were at a junkyard. They found a street hockey net. They brought it home. Brian was setting it up in the street when a car came around the corner. The driver did not stop. Brian was struck. He was critically injured. The Griffin family rushed him to the veterinarian, and the veterinarian told them there was nothing to be done. The family gathered around. Peter gave a eulogy that was, in context, genuinely moving in the way Family Guy occasionally manages to be moving when it is not trying very hard. Brian told the family he loved them, and then he died. He was buried. A replacement dog named Vinny arrived. A month passed within the show's timeline. And 2 episodes later, in Christmas Guy, which aired on December 15th, 2013, Stewie Griffin encountered a past version of himself at the Quahog Mall, a version who had time-travelled forward from a few days before Brian's death in order to purchase Christmas toys early. Stewie borrowed the return pad from his past self, travelled back to the moment before the accident, and pushed Brian out of the path of the car. Brian lived. The Griffin family, locked into the new timeline where the accident never happened, had no memory of the 3 episodes where Brian was dead. Stewie had no memory either, because the past version of Stewie who performed the rescue immediately faded from existence upon completing the trip. Brian, for his part, had no memory of dying at all. His last clear memory was setting up the hockey net, and then Stewie was inexplicably shoving him out of the street for reasons he did not understand. He thanked Stewie. Stewie accepted the thanks. And the show moved forward as though none of it had happened, because within the new timeline, none of it had. This is where the straightforward account of the event ends, and the question begins. Because the question is not whether Brian came back. He clearly did. The question is what exactly came back. And to answer that, you have to sit with a detail that the show introduced in season 19, played as a subplot, and then never directly returned to. In the episode Fecal Matters, Brian takes a DNA test, and the results confirm that he is 1% cat. The episode's joke is that Brian begins behaving like a cat in response to this information, hissing at vacuum cleaners and clawing furniture, and even jumping off the roof to test whether he lands on his feet, which does not go well. The gag runs its course, the episode ends, and the 1% cat DNA result goes back into the show's confirmed canon, where it has sat unexamined ever since. Now consider a different piece of confirmed Family Guy canon from the episode, simply titled 420. In that episode, Quagmire adopts a stray cat named James, and Peter accidentally kills it while attempting to shave it as a prank. The characters panic, and then Peter says something that the show presents as a statement of fact within its own universe. He says, "Relax, cats have 9 lives." And then, methodically, he demonstrates this, continuing to shave the cat while counting down the remaining lives from 8, producing a new living cat with each death, counting down through 7, 6, 5, 4, before Joe says stop doing what you're doing, and the scene ends. The joke is as dark as Family Guy gets, but within that darkness is a confirmed rule of the show's internal reality. In the Family Guy universe, cats literally have 9 lives. Brian is 1% cat. The DNA test confirmed it, and cats in this universe have 9 lives. Whatever that 1% of feline genetic material carries with it, it carries the trait that cats in this world are most famous for possessing. Not the purring, not the fastidious grooming, not the mysterious night vision. The only supernatural ability the show has confirmed as an actual biological reality for cats in Quahog: the 9 lives. If Brian carries enough cat DNA to trigger behavioural feline responses when he learns about it, the question worth asking is whether he also carries the one biological property that makes feline existence in this universe fundamentally different from the existence of every other creature in it. Map this against the deaths. In Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story, a segment of the direct-to-video feature that is set in a future timeline, Brian is shown in heaven, sitting alongside Van Gogh and Hemingway, and Kurt Cobain. He is there because he died, in that future, from chocolate poisoning after eating from a trash can. Dogs die from chocolate. Multiple episodes document this. That death is Brian's first confirmed canonical death in a future timeline, burning through what the 9 Lives framework would call the first available life. In Life of Brian, Brian is hit by a car and dies at the vet in the show's present timeline. He and Stewie travels back and prevents it, but the Brian who died is still dead within that branch of the timeline. His death still happened. What Stewie's time machine did was not resurrect that Brian. What it did was navigate to the next available life, the next Brian in the sequence, the one whose timeline did not include being struck by that particular car on that particular afternoon. The machine selected a different save file, and the show's timeline merged around it. The deaths in alternate timelines accumulate separately, but against the same counter. In Roads to Vegas, an alternate Brian jumps from a hotel balcony in Las Vegas as part of a suicide pact with a version of Stewie trying to escape a loan shark. In Back to the Pilot, during the sequence where multiple versions of Stewie and Brian from different timelines converge, one Brian arrives with his throat cut, that Brian is dead in his timeline. His death is real. The counter does not distinguish between primary and alternate timelines. The counter is just the counter. By conservative accounting, Brian has burned through at least 4 of his 9 lives, across confirmed canon. He may be on his 5th or his 6th, depending on deaths that occurred in timelines the show visited but did not fully chart, which means, by this same accounting, he has somewhere between 3 and 5 lives remaining. He is not immortal. He is not protected by plot armor or narrative importance. He is simply a creature with a biological buffer that most creatures in this world do not have. And that buffer has been spent at a rate that should concern anyone who has been paying attention. Consider what Stewie does with this information if he has worked it out. In Life of Brian, Stewie destroys the time machine before Brian dies. He destroys it at the junkyard deliberately while they are there together. He has used the time machine recklessly throughout the show's prior 12 seasons. He has taken it to World War II, to the pilot episode of Family Guy, to Las Vegas and beyond. The idea that Stewie suddenly finds time travel too dangerous to continue right at the moment when Brian's death in a specific episode would have been preventable, but for the machine's absence is a coincidence worth examining. Then Brian dies. Stewie tries to rebuild the machine. He cannot get the parts. Brian stays dead for 2 full episodes, for a month within the show's timeline. And then Stewie finds another way. Borrows a return pad from a past version of himself and uses it to pull Brian's next available life into the present. After the rescue, Stewie's use of the time machine becomes noticeably more careful. The road to episodes, which for years had been exercises in reckless temporal adventure, shift in tone. Stewie is not cavalier about near-death situations the way he once was. He is protective. He is watchful. He behaves in small and unannounced ways, like someone who has done the math and found the result unacceptable and is now trying to slow the arithmetic down. Brian himself does not know any of this. He has no memory of dying in Life of Brian because the Brian who died in that timeline is not the Brian who exists in the current one. His last memory is the hockey net, then the rescue. He does not carry the weight of that death because he did not survive it. He sidesteps it. But there are things Brian says across the later seasons that suggest he is not entirely unaware that something is asymmetrical about his relationship with mortality. In Brian and Stewie, the bottle episode where the two are locked in a bank vault together over a weekend, Brian talks about his fear of dying and being forgotten. Not death as a concept, not the philosophical fear of non-existence, the specific, personal fear of being forgotten, of vanishing and leaving no evidence that he was there. That is not the abstract anxiety of an existentialist. That is the specific dread of someone who, on some level below conscious articulation, understands that his continuation is not guaranteed, that he is working through something with a finite supply, having that the supply is depleting faster than it should. The 1% is doing more work than the joke ever intended. It is a countdown embedded in a punchline. 9 lives, confirmed universe physics, 1% of the biological material required to access the benefit of those lives. Brian Griffin is not immortal. He is not protected. He is a dog with a genetic quirk and a best friend who may or may not have noticed that the quirk has limits, and who has been spending the years since the rescue being, in his own small and unspoken way, more careful than he used to be. Whatever sleep is pulling at you, let it. Brian will still be counting down when you come back. He has a few lives left. Probably. The philosophical question, embedded in the 9 lives framework, is not just about survival. It is about identity. If the Brian who died in Life of Brian is genuinely gone, if his consciousness ended at the veterinarian's office in November of 2013, then the Brian who lives in the timeline Stewie created by pushing him out of the car's path is not the same being. He has the same memories up to the point of divergence. He has the same personality, the same pretensions, the same failed novel manuscript on the same hard drive. He has the same relationship with Stewie, the same friendships, the same address. From the outside, from the perspective of every other character in the show, and from the perspective of every viewer who watched the arc unfold, nothing changed. Brian is Brian. He came back. The story continued, but from the perspective of the Brian who died, the story did not continue. His story ended at the vet. The Brian who exists now is a next life iteration, a continuation that carries forward all the accumulated context without carrying forward the specific consciousness that experienced losing it. Whether that distinction matters is a philosophical question that the show has no investment in answering, because the show's investment is in the relationship between Brian and Stewie, and that relationship works the same way regardless of which iteration of Brian is participating in it. Stewie, however, may have done the math. Stewie's emotional response in the aftermath of Brian's death, the 2 episodes where Vinny occupied the house and Stewie moved through his grief with a specific and focused desperation, reads as someone for whom the philosophical question matters enormously. Stewie did not simply want Brian back in a general sense. He wanted the return to be complete enough that the relationship could continue as though the gap had not occurred. He went back before the death rather than simply resurrecting afterward, because going back before was the only way to preserve the continuity, to avoid having Brian carry the knowledge of his own death into their resumed friendship, to restore the specific timeline where they are simply Brian and Stewie without the weight of a funeral and a replacement dog and 2 episodes of grief between them. Whether that restoration worked the way Stewie intended is the question the show leaves permanently open. Brian does not know he died. He does not know Stewie saved him. He does not know he is on a later life. And he just knows that one day, Stewie shoved him out of the street for no apparent reason, and the friendship continued, and everything seemed normal. The absence of the knowledge is itself a form of protection. Stewie built it in deliberately. And the question of whether Brian deserves to know is the kind of question that Stewie, who is 1 year old and also a functional genius and also Brian's best friend, is uniquely positioned to carry indefinitely without resolution. He carries it quietly. He has been carrying it since December of 2013. Every episode since then in which Brian and Stewie appear together is an episode in which Stewie knows something Brian does not know. Something that would change the fundamental nature of how Brian understands his own existence. And Stewie has decided, perhaps permanently, and not to tell him. That is an enormous weight for a 1 year old to carry. And the show, which does not flag it or return to it or build an episode around the revelation, simply lets it continue. Stewie knows. Brian does not know. The friendship persists. And somewhere in the biological architecture of a dog who is 1% cat, a counter ticks downward at a rate that only one person in Quahog can currently see. Glenn Quagmire's legal surname is Quaglacek. The episode Tease for Two establishes this. He changed it at some point before the series begins, anglicising the Polish surname into something that sits more comfortably in the social world of Quahog, Rhode Island. The name change is a small detail, easy to let slide past, but it is structurally interesting because of what it implies about the kind of person Glenn wants to be seen as, and the kind of person he was before he made that decision. He comes from somewhere. He built over it. He carries the original beneath the surface, and the surface is what the world gets. His father is Dan Quagmire, a decorated United States Navy pilot who flew supply missions into hostile territory during the Vietnam War. Glenn idolized his father. He says so in the episode Quagmire's Dad. He joined the Navy because his father was Navy. He became a pilot because his father was a pilot. He built his entire professional identity around the man his father represented and the path that man had walked before him. The problem, as the episode makes clear, is that Dan Quagmire was absent for most of Glenn's childhood. He was deployed, he was overseas, he was doing the things that made him the kind of man Glenn wanted to become. And Glenn grew up in a house without him, in a house where his mother, Crystal, was the only parent present. And his mother, the show implies heavily across later episodes, was herself a source of the kind of harm that children should be protected from, and are sometimes instead left inside. The episode Quagmire's Mum establishes that Crystal Quagmire is hypersexual, that her behaviour toward Glenn was inappropriate in ways the episode circles without fully naming, and that Glenn holds his mother's influence directly responsible for the patterns of his own adult life. He tries to tell this to a judge in that episode. The judge does not accept the argument. Brian, in a subsequent conversation, tells Glenn that he is a grown man who should take responsibility for his own actions rather than blaming his mother. That is a reasonable position for Brian to take. It is also a position that does not require examining whether what Glenn is describing is less an excuse and more an accurate account of where certain patterns in his behaviour originate. The show establishes, in a scene that is delivered without the show's usual comedic cushioning, that Glenn Quagmire lost his virginity at age 6 to an adult. This is not a joke with a punchline attached. It is a line delivered into the episode as fact, surrounded by other facts about his childhood. And the episode moves forward without returning to it. 6 years old, an adult, a situation in which there was no possibility of consent or meaningful agency on the child's side. And this happened in a house where his father was absent and his mother was what she was. Children who experience sexual trauma at developmental ages frequently fragment psychologically to survive it. Dissociation is one of the most documented responses to early childhood trauma of this specific type. The psyche, unable to integrate what happened to the conscious identity being constructed at that age, creates distance. Sometimes that distance becomes structural. Sometimes it manifests as what clinicians call dissociative identity disorder, in which the trauma is absorbed into a separate personality structure that can be activated under specific conditions, while the primary self continues functioning in the areas of life that feel safe and controllable. This is the framework through which Glenn Quagmire's behaviour across 25 seasons becomes legible in a way it does not quite manage to be without it. Because Glenn Quagmire is not one person. He is two people using one body, and the switch between them is observable if you watch for it. There is the Glenn who is a United States Navy E9, the highest enlisted rank, confirmed in the episode Death Lives. This Glenn stands with military bearing. His voice is measured and even. He speaks with the formal precision of someone trained to operate under pressure. When he introduces his father to Peter and Joe, he is coherent, composed, and proud. When he flies a commercial aircraft in Airport 07, he handles an emergency situation with calm professional competence. He maneuvers the plane away from a fighter jets. He is fully present, he is fully capable, and entirely unlike the character who inhabits most of his screen time. When Peter behaves irresponsibly in the cockpit during that same episode, Glenn is genuinely and specifically angry, not with the manic performative energy that defines so much of his characterization, but with a controlled, focused displeasure that looks exactly like what it is: a trained professional watching someone treat something sacred as a toy. Flight is the one domain where the other person never appears. Whatever activates the switch between Glenn the pilot and the other configuration does not operate at 30,000 feet. The cockpit is, within the show's confirmed behavioral record, the only consistent space where the first personality is continuously present and the second never emerges. That is not coincidence, that is geography. Yama? That is the territory of the self where the damage does not reach, the place he built specifically to exist in. The professional identity he constructed from his father's example, specifically because it required going somewhere the childhood could not follow. And then he lands, and the switch happens, and it happens through a consistent trigger that the show documents without naming. Sexual stimuli. Lois says something with a double meaning, and Glenn appears in a window. Someone makes a suggestive comment, and his voice accelerates. His posture changes. His motor patterns become entirely different from what they are when he's talking about flying, or his father, or his time in the Navy. The head begins to move differently. The jaw sets differently, and the language accelerates into patterns that belong to something that does not share a vocabulary with the pilot. The show calls this the giggity, the catchphrase that functions as a verbal signature for this second state. Giggity, giggity, said not as celebration but as something more automatic, a verbal tick that signals which person is currently running the body. Echolia, the involuntary repetition of words or phrases, is a known feature of dissociative states and of several neurological and psychological conditions associated with trauma processing. It functions as a marker. It announces a transition. The show has been using this marker correctly in terms of what it signals for the entire run of the series without ever naming what it is marking. The episode screams of silence. The story of Brenda Q is the clearest evidence the show offers that these are two distinct people sharing one biological system. In that episode, Glenn discovers that his sister, Brenda, is in a severely abusive relationship with a man named Jeff. Glenn's response is methodical, tactical, patient, and ultimately lethal. He plans, he executes, he kills Jeff and protects his sister without losing control at any point during the process. His posture, his voice, his emotional register, his entire behavioral profile during this episode matches the pilot, not the giggity. Glenn is fully present for the duration of it. The Glenn who served in the Navy, who was trained to make difficult decisions under extreme pressure, who built a career out of the ability to remain functional when everything around him is threatening to come apart. That Glenn handled the Brenda situation from beginning to end. And then the episode ended, and the next episode arrived, and the switch happened again, the way it always happens again, because the disorder is too old and too deep and too thoroughly embedded for a single protective act to dissolve it. Glenn Quagmire has never been diagnosed in the show. The show does not name what he has. It simply shows it, episode after episode, in the behavioral splitting, in the voice changes, in the motor pattern shifts, in the military precision that exists alongside and entirely separate from the compulsive hypersexuality, in the cockpit that functions as sanctuary, in the giggity that functions as transition announcement, each in the judge who rejected his explanation, and the friend who told him to take responsibility for himself, and in the 6-year-old at the bottom of all of it, in a house where his father was not there, and his mother was the only adult present, absorbing something that the adult Glenn has been trying to process and cannot, trying to rewrite and cannot, trying to outfly and never quite managing to, because no matter how high the plane goes when it lands, the childhood is still there waiting. There is a brother, Gary Quagmire, deaf, referenced once at the naval ball in the episode Quagmire's Dad, by a fellow sailor who appears to confuse him with a different person named Gary entirely. Glenn has a brother named Gary who is deaf and essentially invisible to the narrative. In the theoretical architecture of dissociation, the silent sibling who cannot hear and cannot speak represents something specific. The part that went quiet, the part that absorbed the noise and simply stopped processing it because processing it was impossible. The external Gary that the real Glenn cannot quite account for, cannot quite locate in the narrative of his own life. The show will never say any of this. It does not need to. It built the whole thing into the character from the beginning and left it running, season after season, in plain view. Two people, one face, a cockpit that is a sanctuary, a giggity that is a signal, and a name that was changed before the show even started, because the original name belonged to someone Glenn decided to build over, and the building over never quite took. You can let your breathing slow. There is no urgency here. Just quiet observation of a character who's been asking a question the show never intended to answer. The aviation dimension of Glenn Quagmire's character has a specific texture in the show's confirmed record that is worth examining in detail, because the show is not simply using pilot as a professional designation for a character who primarily exists as a sex comedy vehicle. The piloting is real. The competence is real. The episodes in which Quagmire's aviation skills are the centre of the narrative treat those skills with a specificity and a seriousness that the show does not extend to Peter's brewery work, or Joe's police work, or Cleveland's various professional identities. When Quagmire flies, the show knows what it is describing, and what it is describing is mastery. Not performed competence, not adequate competence, but the deep, embodied, thoroughly internalized competence of someone for whom this specific skill set is not a job, but an identity. He can fly anything. This is the description multiple episodes offer, and the show supports it rather than simply asserting it. The episode Airport 07, in which he maneuvers a commercial aircraft out of a conflict with military fighter jets under conditions that would produce catastrophic outcomes for most pilots, shows rather than tells. The emergency is real within the episode's stakes. The response is real. The outcome is the result of the skill rather than plot convenience. When Peter is removed from the cockpit for treating it as a playground, Quagmire's anger is not performed. It is the anger of someone watching something sacred being treated as a toy, something they built their whole functional identity around being disrespected by someone who has no understanding of what it represents. Flight represents freedom with a specificity that goes beyond the general cultural meaning of the word. It represents vertical distance from the ground where the childhood happened. It represents the most complete possible expression of his father's legacy, the aspect of Dan Quagmire that Glenn could access and build on without having to process the absence, or the mother, or the childhood home, or any of the things that remain on the ground. Flying is the one domain the record consistently places Glenn in without the behavioural disruptions that define everything else about his characterization. When he is in the air, there is no giggity. There is no frenetic energy. There is no compulsive pattern. There is a man doing the one thing he was made to do, in the one space where the damage has not yet learned to follow. The relationship with his father is the hinge everything else turns on. Dan Quagmire was a war hero. He was brave. He saved lives. He flew supply missions into hostile territory when the risk of not making the delivery was that people would die. He is, by the show's confirmed account, precisely the kind of man his son wanted to be. And he was not there. He was doing the heroic thing in Southeast Asia while Glenn was in a house where a female plumber raped a 6-year-old boy, and no adult came to stop it, or address it, or name it, or hold it as something that mattered. Dan Quagmire's heroism and Dan Quagmire's absence are not separable in Glenn's psychology. The man he idolised was also the man who was not there. The identity he built his whole career around is also the identity that left him alone in the circumstances that produced everything the show documents about him. That is not a contradiction that a person resolves. That is a contradiction a person lives inside permanently and navigates as best they can, and sometimes navigates by climbing into a cockpit and pointing the nose at the sky. The show gave Glenn Quagmire a brother named Gary. The show gave Gary Quagmire deafness and near invisibility within the narrative. The show never explained why. That explanation, like so many of the explanations this video has visited tonight, remains in the space between what the show confirmed and what it chose to address. Mayor Adam West does not age. This is a statement that could be made about most characters in Family Guy, a show that operates on what television writers call a floating timeline, in which characters remain at roughly consistent ages regardless of how many real-world years the show has been running. But Mayor West's non-aging is more specific than that, and more interesting, because the show provides enough detail about him across its run to make the floating timeline explanation feel insufficient. There are too many coordinates, too many confirmed dates and ages and references that, when assembled in sequence, produce not a comfortable narrative blur, but a specific anomaly. His driver's license, shown in the episode Foxy Lady, lists him as 61 years old. In multiple episodes across different seasons, he references events from the 1960s as though they occurred recently, as lived memory rather than history. He was a television actor in the 1960s playing a role that defined a specific cultural moment. His character became Mayor of Quahog in the show's second season, in the episode Mr. Saturday Night Special, winning an election. Every character in Family Guy shows some minor evidence of the passage of time across 2 decades of episodes. The children grew from young children to teenagers. Brian aged from 6 to 10 years old by the show's own internal calendar. Even Carter Pewterschmidt, who might be presumed to be as permanent as old money, shows occasional signs of physical aging across the series. But Mayor West is 61 years old on his driver's license in one season and 61 years old in every subsequent season in which his age is referenced. He is frozen in a way that is distinct even within a show that freezes everyone. The show offers one layer of explanation for this, which is that Adam West is simply playing Adam West, a version of himself operating as mayor of an animated town, and that the normal rules of continuity do not apply to him the way they apply to characters who are purely fictional. But this explanation, when you examine it closely, does not resolve the anomaly. It deepens it. Because a character who is simultaneously a real person and a fictional character, an actor, and his own simulacrum, a man who died in the real world in June of 2017 and yet continued appearing in the show until the canonical death episode, who appeared as a ghost before his canonical death had even been established, who exists in the show's future and present simultaneously because his temporal position has never been stable. This is not a character who sits comfortably inside the floating timeline explanation. This is a character for whom the floating timeline is the symptom and not the cause. The behavioural record is where the case assembles itself most clearly. In the episode with the solid gold Dig M Frog statue, a monument West commissions with the entire municipal treasury to commemorate soldiers who died in a war, he faces growing public outrage. His response is to produce a set of keys and jingle them at the crowd to distract them. The jingle keys strategy is a standard technique for managing the attention of infants and certain animals in situations where you need to redirect their focus without engaging their reasoning. The crowd, like in this episode, is momentarily pacified, but then the strategy fails. Someone throws a brick, Mayor West is struck, and he turns to the scene and says, with genuine and apparently sincere shock, "My God, I'm a tomato." The show presents this as a non sequitur, as Adam West being Adam West, as the specific flavour of absurdity the character has always delivered. But the statement is accurate from a specific vantage point. In the scene as animated, West's character model is drawn with a simplified circular shape, a rounded head, a reddish skin tone from the impact, features arranged on a geometric form that does indeed resemble a tomato more than it resembles a human face in full anatomical detail. Adam West looked at himself and saw what he actually is within the show's animated reality, a collection of shapes arranged to suggest a human being. He described it correctly. The joke is that this is insane. The unexamined possibility is that it is accurate, the light bright episode. In breaking out is hard to do, pieces go missing from a light bright set that Mayor West uses to spell out his own name. When he discovers that pieces are gone and his name is incomplete, he does not respond with the mild frustration of a person whose toy is broken. He responds with an existential crisis. My name isn't Adam West, or is it? Who am I? What number did you call? Don't ever call here again. Played as comedy, obviously, delivered in the rhythm of comedy. Ike with the timing and the cadence that the Adam West character has always used to extract laughs from absurdity. But the content of the crisis is not absurd. The content is a man confronting the question of whether his identity is stable when the symbol of that identity, his own name, is incomplete. And within the show's own confirmed metastructure, within the episodes that establish Adam West as simultaneously the actor and the character, within the architecture of a show that has acknowledged at multiple points that its characters exist inside a television show, the question of whether a man is who he says he is when his name is missing letters is not a trivial question. It is the exact right question for someone in that specific ontological position to ask, the KGB revelation. In the episode Spies Reminiscent of Us, and it is confirmed that Mayor Adam West is a KGB sleeper agent. He has been dormant for decades, activated by a specific trigger phrase. This is not played as a joke about West being incompetent or random in his absurdity. It is played as genuine espionage history, as a Cold War program that reached into American civilian life and placed assets in positions that would seem too unremarkable or too eccentric to be examined closely. The KGB activation phrase is dated, a relic of Cold War intelligence architecture that suggests West has been an asset since at least the 1960s, since before the television show that made him famous, since before Quahog, since before the mayor's office. The question the episode does not pursue is what he was placed in Quahog to do, and why a Cold War program would position an asset inside an animated Rhode Island municipality. The show's 300th episode, Inside Family Guy, is relevant here because it confirms something that all of this has been approaching. In that episode, the frame of the show expands to reveal that Family Guy is a television production within its own universe. The characters are actors. Peter is a diva who gets fired every week and crawls back every Friday. Lois wears a wig. The Griffin family is aware that they are performing for someone. This is the show acknowledging what its more meta moments have been gesturing toward for years, that the characters exist inside a structure controlled by forces external to them, that their lives are narrative rather than autonomous, and that there are beings watching from outside the reality they inhabit. Mayor West, in the context of this confirmation, is not simply a character who makes absurd statements. He is a character who's been operating with awareness of this structure, while every other character around him treats their constructed reality as genuine. He reached the conclusion earlier. He has been living with it longer. His bizarre statements are not evidence of irrationality. They are the adapted behaviours of a person who understands the nature of the space he occupies and has chosen to engage with it sideways rather than directly, because engaging with it directly produces no useful result. When he jumps out of windows in the episode where Meg tries to interview him, he is not being random. He is demonstrating that the fall does not injure him consistently, that consequences in this space are applied selectively, that the rules bend around him in ways they do not bend around other characters, and that whoever is observing this would like very much for him to believe that the rules are stable, even though he has already discovered they are not. He survived lymphoma, contracted in the Viewer Mail episode, when he jumped into toxic waste to try to gain superpowers, with no treatment arc and no explanation. The cancer simply resolved between episodes. He appeared as a ghost before his canonical death was established. He continued existing after the real-world death of the actor whose name and face he shared, until the show chose to canonically kill the character, and even then continued existing as a ghost that Peter used a Ghostbusters proton pack to capture. He is harder to end than the show seems to want him to be. The government, in the Toria episode, fires missiles at Peter Griffin's house over a pool permit dispute. The response is catastrophically disproportionate for the stated problem. But if the real concern is not about Peter and not about the pool permit, if the real concern is about what happens when someone living in one of these particular houses starts examining the nature of the structure they inhabit, then the missile response is not disproportionate at all. It is exactly calibrated. It is designed to frighten Peter back into the containment before he develops the kind of clarity that Mayor West developed years ago. Adam West already has that clarity. He always has. He developed it sometime around the 1960s when the first containment attempt failed, and he has been living with it in Quahog ever since, producing absurd statements that are accurate descriptions of the reality he actually inhabits, while the observers log the data and decide what to do with a subject who will not stop seeing clearly. He is not there anymore. He died in 2017 in the real world, and the show gave him a canonical death and a ghost. But the question he embodied persists inside the show's architecture. The question of what it means to know that you're in a cartoon and to have no available move except to continue acting in it. The light Breet said his name. He read it. Some letters were missing, and he asked the only reasonable question: who am I when my name is not complete? The answer the show never gave him is the one this video cannot give you either. But the question, like him, remains. Rest for a moment. The next mystery is a quieter one, or at least it tries to be. Death first appears in Family Guy in the second season, in the episode Death is a Bitch. He arrives in Quahog to collect Peter Griffin, having received a report that Peter had checked the dead box on a medical form in order to avoid paying a bill. The report was fraudulent, filed by Peter himself to escape a financial obligation, but in the administrative architecture of Death's operation, a filed report triggers a collection. Death shows up. He twists his ankle badly while chasing Peter. He is unable to complete his work. And because he is the only entity responsible for human death in this particular region of animated reality, his incapacitation means that nobody in Quahog can die for the duration of his recovery. The show plays the immortality for comedy. People survive things they should not. Pain no longer produces consequences. And Death himself sits in the Griffin living room in a Providence College sweatsuit borrowed from the family, complaining about his mother and his inability to connect with women and the indignities of a job he did not choose with anywhere near sufficient enthusiasm. That episode was voiced by Norm Macdonald. His death is laconic, sardonic, deadpan in the specific way that Norm Macdonald was deadpan, which is to say, with a particular understanding that the funniest way to deliver a joke is to drain every signal of comedy from your voice and let the words do the work alone. The episode aired in March of 2000, and it was the only episode Norm Macdonald voiced. He was committed to another project, a sitcom called A Minute with Stan Hooper, and could not return. The role was given to Adam Carolla, who voiced all subsequent appearances of Death from that point forward. The official, real-world explanation is simple: scheduling conflict, recast. This happens in television production constantly, and usually carries no implications beyond the logistical. But the show does something interesting around the recasting that is worth examining. In the episode Wasted Talent, the second appearance of Death, now voiced by Adam Carolla, There is a moment where he removes his hood. His head is a bare skull, clean, smooth, the straightforward iconography of the Grim Reaper. But in the episode Death Lives, which follows wasted talent in the show's production sequence, Death removes his hood again in a different context, and this time, the skull is not clean and bare. This time, it is covered with insects and has a snake moving in and out of the eye sockets, and the mouth and the ear cavities. Not a stylistic variation, not a different art direction choice for the same scene. A categorically different skull belonging to a categorically different entity performing the same job under the same title. The Family Guy wiki confirms both designs. Bare skull in Wasted Talent, insects and snake in Death Lives. These are two separate entries in the show's visual record, yet two separate physical descriptions of the entity that occupies the position of Death in Quahog, confirming, in the most literal visual way available, that the thing inside the robe changed between appearances. Now consider the structural evidence the show builds around Death over the course of its run. The first piece of that structure is the jurisdictional limitation. In his debut episode, Death states clearly that he is only responsible for human beings. He is not Death for everything. He is human Death specifically in this specific animated universe, which means there are other Deaths, other entities operating in parallel jurisdictions, handling the mortality of other categories of living things. The jurisdictional architecture becomes visible immediately through Death's dog. In the episode Mr. Saturday Night, when Brian almost chokes on a dinner roll at a table where Mr. Weed, Peter's boss, is also present, Death arrives to collect. His dog arrives separately, moments later, to inquire whether anyone choked on the dinner roll. Brian says no. Death's dog apologizes and leaves. The dog is not Death's pet. The dog is a separate entity with a separate operational mandate. Death handles humans. Death's dog handles animals. They are colleagues. They share a universe and apparently a professional relationship, but they have different client bases, different jurisdictions, different trigger events that bring them to the scene. They are two employees in the same organization, handling different departments. The organization has management. In the episode Grumpy Old Man, Carter Pewterschmidt falls asleep at the wheel and causes an accident. Death, who is also involved in the crash, dies. And when Death dies, a larger entity appears to manage the transition. The show calls this entity Super Death. Super Death is not a more powerful version of the Grim Reaper in some abstract cosmic sense. He behaves precisely like a supervisor who has received a notification that a regional employee has gone offline and has arrived to process the transition. He tells Death that he'll be reincarnated as a child in China. Death disappears. Death reappears as an infant girl in China in the episode's final moments. And then Death returns to work in subsequent episodes, back in the robe, back with the scythe, fully operational, as though the transition was administrative rather than existential. This is the most structurally significant detail in the entire Death mythology that the show has confirmed. Death can die. Death can be reincarnated. Death returns to the job after reincarnation. This means the position is not held for eternity by a single cosmic entity. The position is cycled through. Entities occupy it, complete a term, die, are processed by management, reincarnated, and eventually return. The position itself is permanent. The occupant is not. Death is a role, not an identity. It is a job title, and the show has confirmed both that the job can be vacated and that the management structure responsible for filling the vacancy exists and operates with what can only be described as bureaucratic efficiency. Death's powers are inconsistent in ways that make more sense as contractual limitations than as cosmic properties. He can kill people by touching them, in some episodes. In other episodes, he touches Peter repeatedly with no effect. And this inconsistency is acknowledged within the show itself, rather than glossed over. The Death Lives wiki entry confirms that sometimes this is explained by Peter being in a near-death state, which means the usual rules do not apply, but other times Peter is fully healthy, and the touch produces no result. The power is not absolute, it applies under specific conditions that are not fully explained, but that behave exactly the way contractual restrictions would behave. Generally operative, subject to exceptions based on circumstances that the contract's drafters accounted for. He can time travel. He does this in Meet the Quagmires, granting Peter the ability to go back to 1984 for one night, and Peter can physically interact with the past and change the timeline. Death does this casually, as though it is a standard service included in his operational package. This is not a power you would expect from the embodiment of mortality as a universal force. It is a power you would expect from a franchise employee whose contract includes time adjustment capabilities because the narrative universe he manages requires them, because sitcoms need their timelines corrected occasionally, and death's presence at the moment of the correction is how the correction gets authorized. He also cannot die via the means that kill everyone else. He dies in a car accident caused by Carter Pewterschmidt, which is a physical world collision, not a supernatural event. He is vulnerable to the ordinary mechanisms of death that he himself administers to others. This is not a property of omnipotent cosmic forces. This is a property of workers who are subject to the same operational conditions as the population they manage. Norm MacDonald's death and Adam Carolla's death are not the same entity with a different voice actor. Within the show's own confirmed visual and behavioural record, they are two different occupants of the same position. The bear skull and the insect-covered skull are not continuity errors. They are documentation of a transition. Death cycled. Super Death processed the vacancy. A new death took the robe. The franchise continued operating. Somewhere in the multiverse of animated universes, there is a corporate structure managing all of this. Regional managers for different shows, different fictional realities, different mortality frameworks, each operating under a standardized system with local variations. Each accountable to a super death above them and to the specific rules of the universe they have been assigned to manage. The Family Guy, Death is one regional manager in a large organization, currently on what may or may not be his first term, navigating a territory that keeps generating anomalies like Peter Griffin, who refuses to stay mortal under normal circumstances, and Mayor Adam West, who refuses to stay dead in the conventional sense, and Brian Griffin, whose biological makeup means the usual mortality rules apply to him in a slightly different way than they apply to everyone else in Quahog. He lives with his mother. He has trouble meeting women because he keeps accidentally killing them. He took part in movies he is not proud of. He lost his gag reflex. He is, by any reasonable measure, not the job's best performer. But the franchise keeps him on because the franchise needs someone in the robe, and whoever comes next will have the same problems, because the problems are not the employees. The problems are the territories. Somewhere in a cosmic office, a super death is looking at the Quahog account and wondering why the expense reports keep including entries for sprained ankles and car accidents and an inexplicable amount of overtime related to a single overweight man in Rhode Island who will not stop filing fraudulent medical forms. Let the darkness settle around you. Death is doing his rounds. He will get to the rest eventually. Peter Griffin's relationship with death is one of the most structurally anomalous elements in the entire show's confirmed record. And it becomes more anomalous rather than less when you examine it against the franchise model. Death's power, the ability to cause mortality through physical contact, does not consistently apply to Peter. The Family Guy wiki documents this directly, noting that death touches Peter multiple times across various episodes without producing the expected result, and that the inconsistency is acknowledged rather than ignored. The near-death experience explanation covers some instances. but not all of them. There are episodes in which Peter is in perfect health, and death's touch produces no consequence. Within the franchise model, this is legible in a way it is not within the cosmic entity model. If Death is a regional manager with a contractual mandate that includes specific exemptions and exclusions, and if Peter Griffin's biological profile, the mutated, toxin-adapted, genuinely anomalous biology that the show has confirmed across multiple episodes, places him in a category that the contract did not fully anticipate, then Death's inability to consistently apply his powers to Peter is not a bug. It is a coverage gap, a situation the employment contract did not address because the contract was written for a standard human population, and Peter is not quite a standard human in any sense the show has confirmed. Death keeps trying to file the Peter Griffin account, and the system keeps returning it with an error code that the manual does not cover. This would explain why Peter is the character most associated with Death's appearances across the show's run. Not because Peter is the most mortal character, but because he is the most problematic account in Death's territory, the one that keeps requiring manual intervention, the one that generates more administrative complexity than any other single resident of Quahog, the one whose file is full of incidents where the standard procedures did not produce the standard outcomes, and a supervisor review was technically warranted, but nobody submitted the paperwork. Consider what it means for the franchise that Death can be replaced. In the Star Wars parody episodes, something, something, something dark side, and it's a trap. Death was originally cast to play the Emperor Palpatine role. The production decision was made to replace him with Carter Pewterschmidt, and the substitution was made retroactively for continuity purposes. This is documented in the production notes for the episodes. A character was recast between the first and second installment of a multi-part story, and the story's reality was revised to accommodate the change. Death can be written out of a role he was already in and replaced by a different character without the role itself disappearing or the story collapsing. That is not the behaviour of a cosmic force. That is the behaviour of a cast member whose participation in a production is contingent on availability and creative decisions rather than metaphysical necessity. The franchise is still running, Quahog still has a death, the position is still occupied, the territory is still managed, and the mortality of Quahog's human population continues to be processed through whatever entity currently holds the contract. But the entity holding the contract has changed at least once in the show's confirmed record, has died and been reincarnated at least once, has been temporarily replaced in other contexts, and operates with powers that are demonstrably inconsistent and contractually limited rather than cosmically absolute. Norm MacDonald voiced him once and was unavailable to return. Adam Carolla took the role. The robe changed hands. The scythe changed hands. And Quahog kept going, one managed mortality at a time, the franchise none the worse for the transition. There is a lake in Quahog, Rhode Island. The show calls it Lake Quahog. At some point during the episode, it takes a village idiot, and I married one. The Griffin family goes swimming in it at Quagmire's cabin, and they discover that the Quahog oil refinery has been using the lake as a disposal site for industrial waste. The family flees the water. Their hair falls out. Immediately, all of them, every strand of hair dissolving on contact with the toxin-saturated water in which they have been swimming. Mayor Adam West, confronted about this later in the episode, admits on the official municipal record that he authorized the dumping in exchange for free hair oil. The admission is delivered in the flat, matter-of-fact register that Adam West uses for everything, and the episode moves past it with the speed that Family Guy tends to apply to its most genuinely alarming content. The Quahog oil refinery is not the only confirmed source of industrial contamination in the show's environment. In the episode, Brian the Closer, when Quagmire purchases a condominium in a building called Prescott Towers, a neighbour warns him that Quahog Harbour is poisoned. not polluted in a vague or metaphorical sense, poisoned. The major port of entry for all shipping into Quahog, the body of water that connects the town to its industrial and commercial supply chains, is contaminated with industrial waste. This is confirmed canon. It is a single line in a single episode, delivered in passing and never returned to. But it sits in the show's official record alongside the lake contamination and alongside the confirmed Pewterschmidt Industries waste dumping program. And when these three data points are assembled in sequence, the picture they produce is not of a town with an occasional pollution problem. It is of a town in which the water supply has been systematically and continuously contaminated by industrial operations for as long as the town has existed in anything like its current form. Now consider what the show has confirmed about the people who live in this water. Peter Griffin is 6 feet tall and weighs 270 pounds. His face is configured in a way that does not correspond to standard human anatomical proportions. His chin dominates the lower third of his face with a structural depth and size that would be classified as a significant deformity in any clinical description, not an aesthetic variation. His neck and jaw have merged into a continuous mass that the show's character design presents without comment, because the character design is the baseline, but that baseline, when you examine it against what human faces normally do, is describing a specific malformation in bone and tissue development. His son Chris was born so large that a newspaper article called him an elephant child. He inherited Peter's facial architecture, precisely, not as a genetic resemblance, but as a duplication, the same chin, the same proportions, the same structural choices made by a biological system that appears to have reproduced the father's configuration rather than mixing parental genetics in the normal ways that genetics operate. The environmental contamination and the physical abnormality are confirmed separately by the show. The connection between them is what the show does not draw, but the connection is available in the show's own science if you're paying attention. In the episode Family Guy Viewer Male Number 1, the Super Griffins segment shows what happens when the Griffin family is exposed to a concentrated dose of nuclear waste. A truck carrying radioactive material crashes in front of the Griffin household and the entire family is drenched. Every single one of them develops a distinct mutation. Peter can shapeshift, Lois develops superhuman strength, Stewie's cranium doubles in size and his already extraordinary intelligence expands further. Brian moves at superhuman speed. Chris develops pyrokinesis, the ability to generate and project fire. Meg's fingernails grow and contract on command. The show plays this as a self-contained comedic segment. But what it demonstrates within the show's confirmed physics is that Griffin family biology is specifically reactive to toxic chemical exposure in ways that produce mutation rather than sickness or death. Mayor Adam West, who attempts to replicate the Griffin family's experience by rolling around in the same radioactive waste, develops lymphoma, cancer, the standard biological response of human tissue to concentrated radiation exposure. The Griffin family does not develop cancer, they develop powers. Their DNA responds to toxic chemical exposure by expressing new biological traits rather than by degrading. This distinction is worth sitting with. The show has confirmed that the Griffin family's biology responds to toxic exposure differently from normal human biology. The same substance that gives a normal person cancer gives a Griffin a mutation. This is not a one-time observation. It is a demonstrated pattern within the show's own established rules. And the Griffins have been living in and drinking from a water supply that has been contaminated by industrial toxic waste for their entire lives. Peter's documented IQ of 70 is confirmed in the episode Petarded, and confirmed specifically rather than implied. A professor from the Rhode Island State Office of Mental Health administers a standardized IQ test and presents the results on a graph that places Peter's score in a clinical category the show describes without euphemism. His score is just below the threshold that would constitute intellectual disability under the clinical definitions in use at the time of the episode. The show does not walk this back. It does not produce a competing result. It is the official IQ measurement of Peter Griffin, administered by a credentialed professional in a legitimate institutional context, and it places him in a cognitive range that reflects significant impairment. His son Chris, documented in the episode Peter's Daughter, exhibits the same pattern of cognitive impairment, described as stupidity, and the family discusses whether it is a genetic trait passed from Peter. The show concludes that it is, noting that it affects Peter and Chris but not Meg or Stewie. But here is where the genetic explanation becomes interesting in light of the environmental context. If cognitive impairment were a straightforward, dominant genetic trait passed from parent to child, you would expect it to affect all children roughly equally, with some statistical variation based on how the trait interacts with maternal genetics. Instead, the episodes establish that the impairment appears only in the male Griffin children and not in the female ones. That pattern is specifically consistent with a mutation carried on the Y chromosome rather than a dominant trait in general inheritance. Y chromosome mutations are not transmitted the way standard dominant traits are. They pass from father to son and are invisible in daughters. Peter to Chris, male to male, while Meg and Stewie express entirely different cognitive profiles. Stewie's IQ is estimated across the show at somewhere between 250 and 300. Multiple episodes note that it cannot be accurately measured by standard instruments. He designed and built a functioning time machine before the age of 2. He has engineered weapons, pharmaceutical compounds, and at various points functional portals to alternate universes. He operates at a level of cognitive capacity that the show presents as genuinely extraordinary, even within the context of a show in which a dog holds a library card and writes unpublished fiction. Stewie and Peter represent opposite poles of human cognitive expression, both within the same family, both raised in the same house, both drinking the same water, both swimming in the same lake. The same toxic environment that impaired one brain supercharged another. The mutation expressing differently based on something the show has never explained, and the environmental hypothesis provides at least a partial framework for. Dr. Hartman is the Griffin family physician. He has been their doctor for the duration of the show's run. He is, by every metric the show applies to him, an incompetent physician. He is rated the worst doctor at the hospital in Ratings Guy. He uses language that sounds like medical diagnosis, but turns out to mean something else entirely. He has lost his medical license temporarily on multiple occasions. He did not finish high school, confirmed in the episode The Education of Elmer Fudd. He is dyslexic. He is an alcoholic. He attends the same Alcoholics Anonymous meetings as Peter. He is, by the show's own consistent characterization, someone who should not be entrusted with the medical care of actual people. And yet, he has been the Griffin family's primary physician for the entire run of the show. Carter Pewterschmidt, a man who controls a pharmaceutical division capable of synthesizing a cancer cure and suppressing it for decades, employs this same doctor as his personal physician. Multiple episodes document this connection. It even acknowledges the voice similarity between Carter and Hartman, delivered as a meta-joke in the episode Believe It or Not, Joe's Walking on Air, when Peter comments that they sound alike, and Hartman explains that Carter is one of his patients and that there are only so many voices in the world. The explanation neutralizes the question while establishing the relationship. If Hartman is not incompetent but is instead performing incompetence as a cover for a different mandate, the performance is nearly perfect. Because a doctor whose actual job is observation and documentation rather than treatment would look exactly like Hartman looks. He would tell patients they are fine when they are not fine, because treatment would interfere with the longitudinal data. He would be present at every medical event because every medical event is a data point. He would maintain a relationship with the industrial operator whose waste is producing the mutations he is studying, he would be impossible to distinguish from a genuinely bad doctor, because the externally visible behaviours of a genuinely bad doctor and a deliberately non-treating monitor are identical from the patient's perspective. The griffins are not sick, they are not ordinary. They are something the environmental contamination of quahog produced across generations of exposure, and the man who has been their doctor for the entire run of the show was placed there by the man who owns the industries doing the contaminating. None of this is stated in the show. Yeah, all of it is confirmed by the show. The connection is the one thing the show declines to make. Take a slow breath. There is something peaceful in the idea that the mutations made them stronger, even if nobody told them what they were or what caused it. In the second season of Family Guy, in the episode E Pateribus Unum, Peter Griffin applies for a permit to install a swimming pool in his backyard. The application requires the city to verify property records. The city conducts its review, and what the review discovers is that the Griffin family home, the house at 31 Spooner Street, the house Peter and Lois have been living in for the entire duration of the show's existence, the house where 3 children were raised, and a dog wrote a novel, and an evil genius designed a time machine in an upstairs bedroom. And he does not appear on any official map of Quahog or the surrounding municipality. Not an outdated map, not an incomplete map. No map. The address exists in the city's awareness, in the sense that utilities are connected, mail is delivered, and the family clearly inhabits the space. But 31 Spooner Street has been removed from the cartographic record of the city in which it is physically located. Someone, at some point, made it invisible on paper while leaving it entirely present in reality. The show plays this as the setup for a story about Peter declaring his property the independent nation of Pretoria and the United States government refusing to recognise it. But the government's response to the Pretoria Declaration is worth examining on its own terms, because the response is not proportional to the provocation. The United States government does not send a letter. It does not dispatch a county official to explain zoning law. It militarizes the border of Peter Griffin's property. It cuts utilities. It imposes economic sanctions on a man living in a 2-story colonial house on a suburban street in Rhode Island. It fires missiles at the house. The full institutional apparatus of national security mobilizes in response to one man declaring his dining room a country. And it does so with a speed and a specificity that does not suggest bureaucratic process. It suggests a prepared contingency. A file marked "in case of" that was opened the moment the Pretoria Declaration was filed. The show frames this as comedy about American nationalism and governmental overreach. But the speed of the response and the disproportionate scale of the resources deployed both suggest that the government knew immediately what 31 Spooner Street was and reacted not to Peter's declaration, but to the prospect of someone living in that house beginning to understand what it actually is after the fire. In the episode A Very Special Family Guy Freakin' Christmas, an ember from the fireplace catches on wrapping paper and the interior of the Griffin house burns. Furniture, walls, floors, personal belongings, all of it destroyed. The fire is extensive enough that Brian sustains burns, and Lois has a complete emotional breakdown, screaming in ways the show rarely allows its characters to scream. The interior of the house is gone. And then, in the next episode, it is not gone. It is exactly as it was before the fire. Same furniture, same carpet, same layout, no renovation storyline, no fundraiser to replace the destroyed belongings. The Family Guy wiki notes for this episode that it is unclear how the house was repaired. That notation, that editorial acknowledgement of an unresolved question in the show's continuity, is itself a data point. The house's return to default is something the show acknowledges as unexplained rather than ignoring it entirely. The carpet changed colour between seasons. In the first 3 seasons, the living room carpet was yellow. In Season 4 and beyond, it is green. In the episode Calm as a Bitch, Brian comments on the change. Peter explains that he burned the yellow carpet while everyone was out and replaced it. The explanation is retroactive and specific, and delivered to neutralize a visible discontinuity that otherwise would have no in-universe cause. But the explanation has a structural quality that the show often applies to its impossible events. Someone in the household provides a rational account for something that should have prompted investigation, and everyone accepts it without follow-up. The carpet changed because the house reset to a new default configuration between production periods, and Peter's explanation is the house's mechanism for closing the loop, for providing a narrative explanation that the characters can accept, because accepting it allows them to continue inhabiting the space without confronting what the space actually is. Rooms appear in single episodes and do not return. In the episode Mr. Saturday Night Special, there is a downstairs bathroom with a layout that does not match any other architectural description of the house provided in any other episode. It is used for the episode's purposes, and then it is gone, not referenced, not described as having been removed, simply absent from every subsequent episode in which the house's interior is shown. In a very special Family Guy Freakin' Christmas, there is a functional fireplace in the living room that generates the fire which destroys the interior. The fireplace does not appear in any other episode. Rooms that are needed by the narrative manifest within the house's architecture and then dissolve back into the default configuration when the narrative no longer requires them. The house is not a fixed physical space, it is a responsive one. Joe Swanson lives at 33 Spooner Street. He has been paralysed from the waist down for the duration of the show, the result of an injury he sustained while serving as a police officer. His injury prevents him from walking. His injury also does not prevent him from performing feats that would be physically impossible for a fully ambulatory person in peak physical condition. He has superhuman upper body strength. He has demonstrated endurance and physical capability in multiple episodes that the show presents without explanation, because the show has never found it useful to explain why a paralysed police officer is capable of things that Olympic athletes could not do. His paralysis itself is unstable. It has been reversed and re-established in at least 5 separate episodes through 5 entirely different mechanisms. He gets experimental surgery and walks, then shoots himself in the spine to return to the wheelchair because walking made him insufferable. His spine is broken while skiing, briefly restoring mobility. Peter and Joe trade spines in a medical procedure that the show presents as having worked at least temporarily. Dr. Hartman leaves his cell phone inside Joe's back during surgery, producing a period of quadriplegia. Each of these events is treated as self-contained. None of them accumulates into a coherent medical history. Joe's body exists in multiple states simultaneously, depending on what the episode requires, and the wheelchair is the only constant, the anchor point that holds his identity in place across the instability. His origin story is equally unstable. The first account he gives of how he was paralysed is that he slipped off a roof while chasing the Grinch and tripped on a roller skate. In the later episode, Joe's Revenge, he reveals that the Grinch story was a cover, and the actual cause of his paralysis was being shot by a drug dealer named Bobby Briggs. 2 completely different events, 2 different timelines explaining the same outcome. His body cannot sustain a stable past any more than it can sustain a stable physical state. Cleveland Brown lived at 30 Spooner Street. He left Quahog to star in his own spin-off series, The Cleveland Show, which ran for 4 seasons before being cancelled. Upon its cancellation, Cleveland returned to 30 Spooner Street with his new family as though the show had not happened. It's as though Quahog had simply been waiting for him to come back without having noticed his absence, without any character on the street referencing that he had been gone, without any episode requiring anyone to process what his return meant for the space he had previously occupied. The house reset. Cleveland walked back in. The street absorbed his return the way it absorbs everything, without documentation, without explanation, without the kind of acknowledgement that spaces in which people actually live tend to require when someone returns after years away. And in the episode Spies Reminiscent of Us, the house at 30 Spooner Street is rented to two men identified as Dan Aykroyd and Chevy Chase, who are, when the episode resolves, revealed to be undercover government agents conducting surveillance on the neighbourhood. The government has an active operation on Spooner Street. It placed assets in a rental property on the street and ran the operation long enough that the assets established cover identities and integrated into the neighbourhood's social fabric. The episode presents this as a comedy about celebrity cameos and Cold War spy spoofs, but it confirms that the United States government has positioned active intelligence assets on this specific street and considers the surveillance of that street worth maintaining. The containment is not perfect. Houses that reset rather than repair, rooms that appear and dissolve, residents whose physical and biographical histories cannot sustain stable configurations, a street that is cartographically invisible in the city it occupies, a government that treats a pool permit dispute as a national security event and has active intelligence operations running on the residential block. These are not the features of a normal suburban neighbourhood in Rhode Island. They are the features of a managed space, a controlled environment in which the residents are allowed to believe they inhabit ordinary lives, while something else maintains the parameters within which those lives are permitted to occur. The house at 31 Spooner Street does not appear on any official map. It burns down and is restored to factory settings. Its rooms rearrange themselves between episodes. The government fires missiles at it when someone starts asking the wrong questions. And it has been the home of the Griffin family for 25 years of continuous habitation. And not one member of that family has ever looked at any of this and found it worth remarking on. That is perhaps the detail that requires the most sleep to process. Not that the house is what it might be, but that its residents have spent 25 years inside it without once noticing what they are inside. Drift a little. The house will keep its secrets whether you're watching or not. In the episode Meet the Quagmires, Peter Griffin travels back in time to 1984. He is 18 years old in that timeline. So is Lois. She is standing at the edge of a pool at the country club her family owns, carefree and sunlit, exactly the kind of young woman who could have chosen any path and has not yet made the choices that will define the next 4 decades of her life. She is 18 years old in 1984. The math from that single confirmed data point is straightforward and unkind. If Lois Pewterschmidt was 18 years old in 1984, she would be 59 years old in 2023, approaching 60. A grandmother by any realistic accounting of the timeline the show has confirmed. She's 43 years old. She's been 43 years old since the show began in 1999. Her driver's license, shown in the episode, a lot going on. Upstairs lists her height and other physical measurements, but conspicuously does not list a birth year. The document that should anchor her to a specific point in history contains a deliberate gap where the most temporally revealing piece of information should be. She's been 43 for 25 years of real-world production time. She will be 43 in whatever season of Family Guy airs after this video is made, and after the one after that, and for as long as the show continues in any form. 43. Forever. The floating timeline explanation is the one that production contexts always offer for this kind of age stability in long-running animated series. Characters stay the same age, so the show can continue indefinitely without writing itself into a corner where the children have grown up and the parents are elderly. The Simpsons uses this model. Family Guy uses this model. The explanation is real, and it is the intended explanation. But Lois is a specific case within that general framework because of what the show has confirmed about her history before the show began, and because of what the show documents about her behaviour across its run, and because of the way those two things interact when you place them side by side. Before the series begins, Lois had a social life that the show references across multiple episodes with a specificity that suggests the writers found the details too good to leave out. She dated Gene Simmons of the band Kiss. She dated Daryl Hall of Hall and Oates. She had a relationship with the pyrotechnician from the band Whitesnake. She was, by the show's own confirmed account, deeply embedded in the early 1980s rock music world at exactly the time when those bands were at their cultural peak. The Kiss confirmation is particularly specific and recurring. The show returns to the Gene Simmons detail across more than one episode, treating it as established biographical fact rather than throwaway gag. Gene Simmons built his entire persona around a specific aesthetic architecture: the demon, the blood, the supernatural theatricality, the makeup that was not costume but character, an identity he maintained in public for years so completely that the line between Gene Simmons the musician and the demon became genuinely difficult to locate. The Kiss concerts of that era were not ordinary concerts. They were constructed experiences built around imagery that deliberately evoked the preternatural, designed to produce in the audience a specific feeling of contact with something beyond the ordinary world. This is not conspiracy. This is documented music history. Peter Criss as the Catman, Ace Frehley as the Spaceman, Paul Stanley as the Starchild, and Gene Simmons as the Demon. It's breathing fire and spitting blood on stage at stadiums full of people who came specifically to feel what it was like to be in the presence of something that was performing darkness, rather than simply performing music. Lois was there for this, not as an audience member but as a participant, in the specific and intimate sense that the word participant applies when you are the person the performer goes home with. She was young and beautiful, and terrified of becoming what her mother was becoming, the aging matriarch of an old money family whose relevance was tied entirely to her husband's prominence, who watched herself becoming invisible in proportion to how obviously she was aging, who married into a dynasty and adapted to its rules and maintained the social performance indefinitely, while the performance of youth became increasingly difficult to sustain. Lois has been 43 since 1999. She was young in 1984. The gap between those two facts is 15 years of real-world time. And then she stopped. She froze. The clock found a number and held it. And the explanation the show offers is the floating timeline, which is true in the technical production sense, but which the show itself complicates through the behavioural documentation of what Lois becomes over the course of its run. For the first several seasons, Lois Griffin is the moral centre of the family. Patient, warm, capable, the person who holds the household together through the relentless chaos Peter generates. She is not a saint, and the show does not try to make her one. She has her frustrations and her vanities and her moments of poor judgment. But she is fundamentally oriented toward the people she loves. She functions as the anchor. She is the reason the Griffin household is recognisable as a household rather than an operating disaster zone. Her care for her children, complicated and imperfect as it sometimes is, reads as genuine. Then something changes. The show's later seasons document a Lois who is measurably different from the Lois of the early run. The cruelty toward Meg escalates beyond the early show's version of it into something that the show's own production staff and critics have described publicly as having gone too far. The infidelities accumulate. Affairs are referenced, depicted, and treated with diminishing consequence as the seasons progress. The violence surfaces. In the episode Undergrounded, a flashback confirms that Lois killed a waitress during her honeymoon with Peter, an act of lethal violence that the show presents as something she did for Peter's entertainment. In a later episode, she mentions casually and without context that she once killed a jaywalker, and in one of the most quietly strange lines in the entire run of the show, she tells Chris during a conversation that every mother has killed someone. Every mother has killed someone. Said in the flat, matter-of-fact register of something so obvious it does not warrant elaboration. Said to her child in a domestic setting, without the context that would make it a joke the audience could easily decode, he without the framing that would let it slide past as dark comedy. Said and then moved past, the show continuing to the next beat, as it always does. The season 22 rehabilitation is documented. Critics who had been writing about Lois's character arc for years noted publicly that she began behaving in ways more consistent with her early season self. She was kinder to Meg. She was more attentive to her children. She exhibited the warmth that the original character had been built on. The production team acknowledged in various contexts that the character had drifted and they were correcting the drift. Whether the correction represented character growth within the show's narrative or a production decision made in response to audience feedback is a question with a publicly available answer. But the more interesting question is what the arc itself describes. A woman who froze at 43, and over the course of the seasons that followed, that freezing became progressively colder, more violent, more willing to harm the people she was supposed to love, less encumbered by guilt or consequence, less recognizable as the person she was at the beginning. And then, in the later seasons, a reversal, a return toward warmth, a movement back towards something that looks like the original. The show confirmed in the episode Lethal Weapons that Stewie left a time bomb ticking in Lois's own body, placed there before he was born, set to detonate on her 50th birthday. This is canon. The bomb exists. Stewie placed it in utero. It has not gone off. Lois has not reached 50. She's been 43 for 25 years, and she will presumably remain 43 until the show chooses to address what it placed in her biography in that one episode, and has not returned to since. The bomb is waiting. The birthday is approaching, always approaching, never quite arriving, suspended in the same temporal stasis that holds her age at 43 and her timeline at a permanent distance from the arithmetic that should have made her nearly 60 by now. The show does not need to explain this. It does not explain most of what it confirms. It simply places the details in the record and moves forward, leaving viewers to assemble the implications in whatever configuration their own imagination provides. Lois Griffin is 43 years old. She has been for a quarter of a century. Her past belongs to a decade whose calendar does not align with her current age. Her behaviour shifted in ways that the show's own production staff found worth correcting. And somewhere inside Lois herself, a device she does not know about is waiting for a birthday that cannot come as long as the clock holds where it holds. Whatever the clock is holding, it is holding something. And 43 is not the number it found by accident. Let the quiet deepen around you. We are almost to the last mystery, the one that is, in some ways, the strangest of all, because it is the one that watches you back. The violence that surfaces in Lois's confirmed canonical record is worth examining, not because it's frequent, but because of the specific nature of what the show treats as requiring no explanation. Dawn, the waitress in the honeymoon flashback, is killed to please Peter. This is the framing the show provides. Not in rage, not in self-defense, not in a moment of psychological fracture that the episode examines or contextualizes. She kills a waitress to demonstrate something to her husband. The gesture reads as a performance, an act designed to communicate a specific willingness rather than an act produced by specific provocation. The willingness is the point. The capacity is already there. The act is simply its expression. The jaywalker is even stranger because the show provides less context. She was asked a question. She answers it. She killed a jaywalker at some unspecified point in her history. The casual delivery, the complete absence of framing. Thibault. The way the line sits in the episode without producing a follow-up reaction from whoever she is speaking to suggests that within the specific conversational register of that moment, this information does not feel remarkable to her. It is simply a thing that happened. She is reporting it the way you would report that you once owned a blue car or lived in a different neighbourhood. A fact about her history that she is neither proud of nor ashamed of, simply carrying. And then the line to Chris, "Every mother has killed someone," said to a child in a domestic setting, as though she's offering wisdom or perspective or a kind of dark reassurance, as though the claim is not extraordinary, but is instead something that becomes visible to you once you become a mother and understand what that role sometimes requires. The show does not confirm that this is literally true, that motherhood universally includes a homicide somewhere in its timeline. But Lois delivers the line as though she believes it is, as though her own experience of motherhood has included it, and she has moved through it and arrived at the place where she can state it plainly, without the weight it would carry for someone who had not yet been through whatever she has been through. Stewie's time bomb, set to detonate on Lois's 50th birthday, appears in Lethal Weapons and is confirmed as canon. Its continued dormancy is not a continuity oversight. The show knows the bomb exists. It has chosen not to return to it in a way that would require resolving it. The bomb sits in the show's confirmed record the way many of Family Guy's most interesting details sit, acknowledged once, documented, and then left to wait. It requires a specific birthday to detonate, and the specific birthday requires the clock to reach 50, and the clock has been at 43 for 25 years. The bomb and the frozen birthday are each other's explanation. As long as the clock holds, the bomb waits. As long as the bomb waits, the clock has a reason to hold. They are suspended in a mutual arrangement that the show built in and has not yet seen fit to resolve. Whether Season 22's rehabilitation represents genuine character redemption, or a production correction, or something more narratively specific inside the show's own mythology, is a question that the show's own confirmed record does not answer. What it does confirm is that the shift happened. That something in the Lois who emerged in the later rehabilitation seasons looked more like the Lois of the first several seasons than the Lois who had occupied the middle run of the show. That the warmth came back, that Meg was treated more gently, that the cruelties pulled back towards something that could be called, in the show's own register, functional love. Something that looked, from the outside, and with the benefit of 25 years of watching it, like a person working their way back from a place they had gone further into than they intended to go. What changed and why, the show does not say. It almost never says. It simply shows. And what it shows is a woman who is 43 years old, who has been 43 for as long as the show has existed, who carries a history that does not align with the age the number assigns her, and who has a bomb somewhere in her house that is waiting for a birthday she is not allowed to reach. She is not getting older, she is just getting further from who she was, in the direction of who she is now, one season at a time, frozen at the number the clock found and held in whatever year it found and held it, carrying inside her body a device Stewie placed before he drew his first breath, waiting for a birthday the clock will not allow her to reach. In the episode April in Quahog, Tom Tucker and Diane Simmons broadcast a story on Channel 5 News claiming that a black hole had been discovered and was projected to consume the Earth within 24 hours. The claim was fabricated. It was an April Fool's Day prank engineered by the station's anchors. The black hole did not exist. The Harvard physicist cited in the report was fabricated. The NASA confirmation was fabricated. The deadline of 24 hours before planetary destruction was entirely fictional content delivered through Quahog's primary news channel in a format indistinguishable from legitimate reporting. The town of Quahog believed it completely. Every resident who received the broadcast accepted it as fact. the town descended into mass riots within hours. Widespread looting followed. 87 people in Quahog took their own lives rather than wait for the black hole. When the prank was revealed the following day, Tom Tucker and Diane Simmons appeared on camera to celebrate the success of their stunt. They described the 87 deaths and the citywide chaos as evidence that the prank had worked exceptionally well. They were proud, and there were no legal consequences. Channel 5 continued operating, the town reset, and Brian Griffin, the Griffin family's most intellectually capable member, the one most likely to pursue the implications of what had just happened, called them dicks. That was the full extent of the response. There is a version of this story in which what happened in Quahog on that April Fool's Day is simply a very dark joke about media credulity and the failure of critical thinking in communities that receive all of their information from a single source. Family Guy makes this kind of joke regularly. It is within the show's established register. The episode can be read entirely within that frame, and the reading is valid. But there is another version, which the episode does not contradict, in which what happened on that day was not a joke, but a test. A deliberate demonstration conducted by people who already suspected the result, of the degree to which Channel 5 News has not merely influence over, but operative control over the cognitive and behavioural states of Quahog's population. The test confirmed that the channel can cause 87 people to end their lives through a single broadcast, not through persuasion in any ordinary sense, not through argument or evidence or sustained psychological pressure, through a single news report delivered in the standard format, received through the standard channel, processed through brains that appear constitutionally incapable of checking the information against any external source before acting on it. No resident of Quahog, faced with a report that the world would end in 24 hours, thought to consult any second source, not CNN, not a government emergency website, not a call to family in another city to ask if they had heard the same thing. The claim that a black hole was approaching Earth at a velocity that would cause complete planetary destruction within a single day is the kind of claim that, if true, would be the most widely reported event in human history. Every television channel in the world would be covering it. Every phone would be receiving emergency alerts. It would be impossible to be in a modern connected city and encounter this information only from one local Rhode Island news station. And yet not one person in Quahog found this impossible. Not one person's mind produced the question of why only Channel 5 had this exclusive. The information entered and became reality, and the town's behaviour reorganised around it immediately and completely. Channel 5 News appears in nearly every episode of Family Guy. Tom Tucker is a recurring character who shows up constantly, in background televisions, in scenes at the Drunken Clam, in the Griffin living room, at public events across Quahog. The news is playing somewhere in almost every episode. It is ambient, it is continuous. It is the permanent auditory backdrop of life in Quahog, in a way that no other media source is, in a way that no other character's presence in the show's background manages to be. Tom Tucker delivers information. The characters receive it. The characters' understanding of events in Quahog is shaped by what Tom Tucker says about those events, and the events themselves, in the show's own confirmed record, frequently do not persist in the characters' memories between episodes. Major disasters occur and leave no trace. Catastrophes resolve without explanation. The town that was destroyed last week is the same town this week, entirely restored, without anyone acknowledging the restoration. These resets happen between every season and most major multi-episode arcs. The show's own wiki documents them as continuity issues or animation choices, but they accumulate into a pattern that is consistent with a specific mechanism. A channel that does not merely report on Quahog's reality, but actively maintains it, broadcasting the version of the town's current state that the narrative requires, and rewriting the collective memory of events that no longer serve the story. Tom Tucker tells Quahog what happened. The town remembers what Tom Tucker told them. The things Tom Tucker does not broadcast, Quahog does not remember. The mechanism is not invisible. It is the show's own documented operational structure for managing continuity, made visible by examining what the canon contains rather than what it explains. The laugh track is a related question, and in some ways the stranger one. Family Guy is an animated series. It does not have a live studio audience. It does not need one for production purposes. And yet in specific episodes, in specific scenes, something that sounds exactly like a studio audience laugh track is present. Not as diegetic sound from a television playing in a scene, as actual audience reaction to events occurring in the Griffin universe. Peter, in the episode The Courtship of Stewie's Father, installs a live studio audience inside the show's own reality, placing bleachers of people directly on Spooner Street. Ian then has to pause while delivering a line because the audience will not stop laughing. He waits. He listens to them. He continues when they have finished. He hears them. They exist in his world as acoustic phenomena. They are not a production choice. They are a feature of the space he inhabits. The episode Inside Family Guy, which aired in season 15 as the show's 273rd episode, confirms through its entire structure what the laugh track moments have been gesturing toward. The episode reveals that Family Guy is a television production within its own universe. The characters are actors, they have contracts, they attend table reads, they worry about cancellation. Peter is fired every Monday and returns every Friday. Lois wears a wig. The family's aware that they are performing for observers, that their lives are narrative rather than autonomous, that someone or something outside the space they inhabit is watching them, reacting to them, making decisions about whether their universe continues based on the quality of their performance. Stewie sings directly to Fox, the network, asking them to never let him die. He looks into the camera when he does this. He is not singing to Peter. He is singing to entities outside the frame whose decisions govern whether the frame continues to exist. This is the show confirming in its 300th episode something it has been doing in individual moments across its entire run. The characters know they are being watched. They know by beings whose nature they cannot fully see or access, beings who observe their suffering and find it entertaining, beings whose laughter creates actual sound in the Quahog reality, the same way Channel 5's broadcasts create actual memory. The laugh track is not an editing choice. It is the acoustic signature of higher dimensional observation. It is the sound of watchers watching, rendered as ambient noise in the space being watched, audible to the characters who inhabit that space, whether they consciously register it or not. Peter breaks the fourth wall throughout the show's run, in ways too numerous and too varied to be accidents. He talks to the camera. He references Fox and the writers and the Emmy Awards. He tells the audience he is about to do something they should not watch. He gives them a thumbs up at the end of episodes, a direct and personal acknowledgement of a relationship with watchers he cannot see. He experiences time differently during cutaways, confirmed in Back to the Pilot, where the early characters are shown waiting, frozen, while a cutaway plays out in another space, aware that their reality has paused for the benefit of observers they cannot address directly. They stand in the kitchen. They check their phones. They wait for the cutaway to finish so they can continue the episode they know they are in, the episode that exists for beings watching from the dimension where the show is a show rather than a life. Road to the Multiverse confirms that the dimension where the show is accessible. Stewie's return pad can navigate to a live-action universe, the universe where the animated characters resolve into real physical beings, the universe that is one layer up in the dimensional stack from Quahog. In that episode, Brian and Stewie exist briefly in that higher dimension before returning to the animated one. They can see it, they can get there. The barrier is navigable, and if it is navigable from their side, it is observable from ours. We are the watchers. The laugh track is our voice. Every time we find something in their lives funny, they hear it. They have always heard it. They just do not always know what to call it. Quahog, Rhode Island. A town where the water is poisoned and the people do not age, and a man named Stan Thompson fathered a child nobody talks about, and a pilot named Glenn Quagmire contains two people who have never been formally introduced to each other, and a dog is burning through biological lives one by one, and a mayor knew all along what the rest of them are only starting to suspect. A town where the news channel manages reality and the house resets, and the death franchise is run by a middle manager who lives with his mother, and a woman who should be nearly 60 is still 43 with a bomb waiting somewhere in her house for a birthday she will never quite reach. A town where the characters know they are on television and can hear the audience laughing at their suffering and cannot stop performing because their continued existence depends on the performance being good enough for the watchers to keep the show on the air. All of it confirmed. All of it documented in episodes you can find, in wiki entries you can verify, in production histories you can read. The show built all of this into its official record and then moved forward without explaining it, because explaining it would require the kind of confrontation with its own architecture that Family Guy has never been built to sustain. The jokes need to keep moving. The cutaways need to keep cutting away. The reset needs to keep resetting. And so, the mysteries stay, quiet and permanent and patient, embedded in the canon of a show about a man with no neck and a cleft chin who lives on a street that does not appear on any map, in a house that repairs itself overnight, drinking water that has been poisoned for decades, hearing laughter from a dimension he cannot access, raising a daughter whose biological father he never mentions, surviving things that should have killed him 20 times over, and never, not once, not in 25 years and counting, asking the question that all of it is waiting for him to ask. The question of what Quahog actually is. The question of what 31 Spooner Street actually is. The question of what the Griffins actually are, inside a world that was built around them and that resets when they damage it, and that is watched by beings who find their suffering entertaining, and that has been waiting patiently for one of them to look up from the chaos and notice the walls. Peter will not look up. He never does. He is the house's best guarantee against that kind of clarity. But somewhere in an upstairs bedroom, a 1-year-old genius is checking the numbers on his biological father's closest friend and doing math that the show will never confirm, but that the show's own evidence quietly supports. Stewie knows something about the walls. Stewie has always known. He built the only tool that can navigate them. And he destroyed it once and rebuilt it, and uses it carefully now, like someone who has done the math on how many trips remain. The mysteries of Family Guy. All of them confirmed. None of them resolved. All of them available to anyone who watches closely enough and thinks slowly enough and is willing to sit with the discomfort of a question that does not have a scheduled answer. Tonight, you have sat with them. And now, if sleep is pulling at you, there is no better moment to let it. The questions will still be here in the morning, exactly where they were. They have been patient for 25 years. They can wait one more night. Rest well. The house at 31 Spooner Street is watching. But tonight, quietly, gently, so are you.